The cruelest betrayals are not the ones that end a life, but the ones that convince the innocent they deserved their fate. The morning bells rang across the capital beneath a sky as pale as winter ash, yet not a single voice rose above the silence that surrounded Adeline Carter. She stood alone in the center of the great square, her simple green-gray dress stirring gently in the cold breeze while countless eyes watched from behind stone balconies and crowded streets. Some stared with pity. Others with satisfaction. Most simply looked away, unwilling to meet the gaze of the young Omega branded a traitor. Across from her stood the man she had once believed was chosen by destiny itself. King Darius Ashford remained motionless upon the palace steps, dressed in black royal armor that reflected the weak morning light, a crimson cloak flowing behind his broad shoulders. His long dark hair shifted with the wind, framing a face carved with discipline rather than cruelty, yet today there was no warmth in his steel-gray eyes. The royal decree rested unopened in his gloved hand because he already knew every word written upon it. Adeline searched his face one final time, not for mercy but for doubt. She found neither. Months earlier she had crossed frozen forests to warn him of an invasion. She had uncovered hidden messages passed between noble houses. She had endured suspicion after suspicion because protecting the kingdom had mattered more than protecting herself. Yet every truth she offered had been twisted into another accusation. Every act of loyalty had become another reason to distrust her. Someone had carefully rewritten her story until even she almost wondered whether she truly had failed. Above the crowd, Lady Vivian Hawthorne stood beside the royal council, dressed in silver and white, every inch the perfect Luna. Her expression carried sorrow so convincing that many believed tears rested just behind her smile. Only Adeline knew how easily kindness could wear the mask of deception. A royal guard stepped forward and quietly asked whether she wished to speak. Adeline slowly lifted her head. Her voice remained calm despite the weight pressing against her heart. "I hope one day the truth finds this kingdom, even if I am no longer here to see it." A murmur spread through the square before fading into another uneasy silence. Darius looked at her for only a heartbeat longer before lowering his eyes. "Carry out the sentence," he ordered, his voice steady enough to hide the storm gathering deep inside a place he no longer listened to. As the world blurred around her, Adeline felt no anger. Only grief. Not because she had been condemned, but because the man she had trusted most had never truly seen her. Darkness folded gently around her thoughts. The noise disappeared. The cold vanished. Then came a heartbeat. Another. And another. She inhaled sharply. Warm summer air filled her lungs. Sunlight spilled through an open cottage window onto rough wooden floors. Birds sang outside as though nothing terrible had ever happened. Adeline sat upright so suddenly the chair beside her tipped over. Her trembling hands rushed to her neck, then her face, then the faded ribbon tied around her wrist. She was alive. The calendar hanging beside the fireplace confirmed what her racing mind could barely accept. 3 months before the trial. 3 months before the accusations. 3 months before the king looked at her with empty eyes. Tears gathered but refused to fall. Every nightmare returned at once. Vivian's smile. The council's whispers. Darius's command. The unbearable silence that followed. This time she would not wait for fate to tighten its grip. This time she would not waste her heart begging to be believed. She crossed the room, opened the small wooden chest beneath her bed, and removed the sealed invitation summoning her to the royal palace in 2 days. In her first life she had held that letter with hope. Now she carried only memory. Without hesitation, Adeline fed the invitation into the fireplace. Orange flame swallowed the parchment until nothing remained except drifting ash. Somewhere far beyond the quiet village, inside the royal palace she had just abandoned, King Darius Ashford suddenly paused in the middle of a council meeting, his chest tightening beneath polished armor as an unfamiliar ache passed through him, as though someone he had never truly known had just walked out of his life forever. When fate loses sight of the one it was hunting, even kings begin to feel the emptiness they cannot explain. Before sunrise the next morning, Adeline Carter stood at the edge of the quiet village with a small leather satchel resting against her shoulder. In her first life she would have spent this morning preparing for her journey to the royal palace, believing every step brought her closer to the future she had dreamed of. She remembered carefully pressing her only decent dress, rehearsing respectful greetings, and wondering if she might someday earn enough trust to serve within the royal household. That hopeful girl no longer existed. She glanced back only once at the tiny cottage that had sheltered her since childhood before following the narrow forest road leading west instead of north. Every mile she placed between herself and the capital felt like another thread cut from the web that had once trapped her. Yet freedom was strangely heavy. Every bird call reminded her of the morning before her trial. Every gust of wind carried echoes of whispers that had branded her a traitor. She forced herself to keep walking. By noon she reached a crossroads where traveling merchants had gathered beneath enormous oak trees. Wagons filled with grain, wool, and pottery waited while horses drank from a nearby stream. One elderly merchant smiled kindly when he noticed her tired expression. "Headed toward Ashbourne?" he asked. Adeline hesitated before quietly shaking her head. "Somewhere smaller," she answered. "Somewhere no one knows my name." The old man chuckled softly. "Sometimes that is the greatest treasure a person can find." His words lingered in her thoughts long after the wagons disappeared down the road. In another life she would have continued toward the palace without ever meeting him. Already the world felt different. Far away inside the royal castle, King Darius Ashford struggled to ignore the strange unease following him through every chamber. The council discussed border taxes, trade agreements, and military patrols, but every report faded into meaningless noise. His wolf paced restlessly beneath his calm expression, disturbed by an absence it could neither identify nor understand. Several times he caught himself glancing toward the grand entrance as though expecting someone to arrive. No one did. Finally Lord Cedric, the oldest member of the council, cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, is something troubling you today?" Darius answered without thinking. "Someone is missing." The chamber fell silent. Cedric frowned. "We have received no reports of missing nobles or officers." Darius slowly shook his head. "Not someone important," he murmured, almost to himself. "Someone. I cannot remember." The words unsettled him more than anyone else. Kings did not forget faces. They certainly did not mourn strangers they had never met. Meanwhile Adeline rented a small room above a family bakery in the peaceful town of Briar Hollow. The smell of fresh bread drifted through the wooden floorboards each morning, and for the first time in years she slept without hearing palace bells. Days passed quietly as she helped knead dough, swept the shop, and earned enough coins to remain unnoticed. Yet peace refused to erase memory. Every night the same dream returned. She stood before the palace gates, calling out a warning while soldiers rushed past without listening. Then Darius turned away before she could finish speaking. She always woke before dawn with tears cooling on her cheeks. One rainy evening she unfolded an old regional map across the bakery table, tracing familiar roads with careful fingers. Suddenly she froze. A memory surfaced with startling clarity. In her first life, exactly 7 days from now, an assassin disguised as a courier would attempt to enter the royal palace through the eastern supply gate. She had exposed the plot before it succeeded, yet someone had later claimed she had helped plan the attack instead. Her warning had become the very evidence used against her. Adeline closed her eyes as her heart pounded. If she remained silent, history might follow another path. But if no one stopped the assassin, innocent lives could be placed in danger. She had escaped the palace, but she could not escape the choice waiting for her once again. Some memories are not meant to imprison us. They return because they are waiting for someone brave enough to change them. Adeline Carter remained seated beside the small bakery window long after the rain had faded into a gentle mist. Her fingertips rested upon the faded map while the memory refused to loosen its grip. 7 days. In her first life, 7 days had been enough for a lie to grow into a sentence that destroyed everything she loved. She remembered standing before the palace guards with evidence hidden beneath her cloak, begging them to search the eastern supply wagons before sunset. They had laughed at an unknown Omega carrying impossible accusations. By the time the hidden assassin had been discovered, someone had already whispered that only the person who planned such an attack could have known where to look. Her warning had become the foundation of her downfall. Adeline closed the map and whispered to herself, "Not this time." She refused to walk back into the same trap. Yet she also could not bear the thought of innocent servants or guards paying the price for her silence. There had to be another path, one that protected lives without placing her own beneath suspicion. The next morning she left Briar Hollow before dawn and followed an old woodland trail leading toward the capital without ever intending to enter its gates. She stopped nearly 15 miles away where the royal messenger routes crossed through dense pine forests. Hidden behind thick branches overlooking the road, she patiently watched every passing wagon. Hours drifted by beneath shifting clouds until a modest supply cart finally appeared, pulled by 2 tired horses and carrying barrels marked with the royal seal. Everything looked ordinary except for one rider traveling several yards behind the wagon. The courier wore the correct colors, but Adeline immediately recognized the silver clasp fastened beneath his cloak. In her previous life she had noticed that same unusual clasp moments before everything unraveled. Her heartbeat quickened. She could not approach him. She could not accuse him. Instead she quietly circled through the trees until she reached the narrow stone bridge. Lying ahead of the convoy, kneeling beside the weathered road marker, she removed a piece of charcoal from her satchel and carefully wrote a short anonymous warning across the pale surface of the stone. Inspect every courier entering through the eastern supply gate. Hidden danger travels with today's delivery. She stepped away just as distant hoofbeats echoed behind her. Without looking back she disappeared into the forest. Several miles away inside the royal palace, Darius Ashford stood alone upon the western balcony overlooking the city below. Sleep had become an unfamiliar companion. For 3 consecutive nights he had dreamed of the same impossible scene. A young woman stood beneath gray skies wearing a simple green-gray dress. He could never see her face clearly. He only remembered sorrow filling her eyes before she quietly turned away from him. Every morning he awoke with the strange certainty that he had failed someone whose name he did not know. His wolf had grown increasingly restless, refusing food, pacing endlessly beneath his calm exterior. Even the palace hounds whimpered whenever he passed, sensing the invisible tension surrounding their king. A royal guard suddenly hurried onto the balcony and bowed deeply. "Your Majesty, the Eastern Patrol has reported an anonymous warning carved into a roadside marker. Captain Rowan believed you should see it immediately." Darius accepted the written copy without hesitation. As his eyes moved across the message, an unfamiliar chill settled over him. Something inside his soul whispered that whoever had written these words was trying to protect him rather than manipulate him. "Increase inspections at every eastern checkpoint," he ordered quietly. "No exceptions." The guard hurried away while Darius remained motionless, staring toward distant forests hidden beyond the hills. He had no reason to believe the warning was genuine. He had even less reason to feel grateful toward a stranger he had never met. Yet somewhere beyond those endless trees, a woman with haunted eyes slowly lowered her hood and continued walking farther from the kingdom she had once given everything to save, never realizing that for the first time, history had answered one of her choices with a different ending. The future never surrenders quietly. It fights for every ending it has already claimed. The anonymous warning reached the eastern supply gate just before sunset, and for the first time in years Captain Rowan ordered every wagon, barrel, and courier to be inspected without exception. Hidden beneath a false compartment inside an ordinary delivery cart, the guards uncovered coded letters, forged royal seals, and a concealed blade that no honest messenger could explain. The discovery spread through the palace within minutes. Servants whispered that disaster had been avoided. Officers praised the vigilance of the Eastern Patrol. Yet inside the council chamber, silence settled like a heavy curtain. King Darius Ashford examined every recovered item with narrowed eyes while his wolf remained strangely calm for the first time in days. Someone had prevented a tragedy before it unfolded. Someone had known exactly where to look. Across the polished table, Lady Vivian Hawthorne folded her hands gracefully, though a flicker of surprise crossed her otherwise perfect expression. This had never happened before. The king noticed the smallest change in her face, but before he could question it, she smiled with practiced warmth. "Whoever sent the warning deserves the kingdom's gratitude," she said softly. "Although I cannot help wondering how such precise knowledge reached them." The words seemed innocent, yet they planted the same dangerous seed Adeline remembered from her first life. Suspicion. Darius remained thoughtful instead of agreeing. "Perhaps," he answered quietly, "or perhaps someone risked everything to stop what others failed to see." Vivian lowered her eyes to hide her disappointment. The conversation had not followed the path she expected. Meanwhile, several miles beyond the capital, Adeline returned to Briar Hollow before nightfall. She carried fresh herbs gathered from the nearby hills, smiling politely as the baker's wife thanked her for helping prepare the next morning's bread. The peaceful rhythm of ordinary life almost convinced her she could leave the past behind. Almost. As she arranged warm loaves across wooden shelves, an unexpected sensation washed over her. A faint pressure settled beneath her ribs, gentle but unmistakable, like the distant echo of a heartbeat that did not belong to her. She froze. In her first life she had ignored that strange feeling whenever Darius had been nearby, believing it was nothing more than admiration for her king. Now she understood it was something older, deeper, and far more dangerous. The mate bond had not disappeared simply because she had changed her choices. It still existed. It had merely become quieter. She closed her eyes until the feeling slowly faded. "Not again," she whispered under her breath. "You will not lead me back to that ending." That night's sleep refused to come easily. Instead another memory surfaced. She remembered a royal hunting expedition scheduled only 2 days away. During her first life Darius had returned safely because she had unknowingly altered his route after discovering fresh wolf tracks near the northern cliffs. No one had realized that the original trail had already been prepared as an ambush. This time she would not be there. She sat upright, every trace of peace disappearing. If history continued without her, the king might ride directly into the danger she had once prevented without ever realizing it. At nearly the same hour, Darius stood alone in the palace courtyard beneath a sky filled with brilliant stars. Sleep had abandoned him once again. As moonlight reflected across the ancient stone fountain, an unfamiliar image flashed through his mind. He saw slender hands covered with flour, arranging fresh bread across a wooden counter while sunlight warmed golden brown hair. The vision vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving him staring into empty darkness. He had never visited such a bakery. He had never met the woman whose face remained hidden within the dream. Yet the quiet happiness surrounding that impossible memory felt more real than the palace itself. His wolf stirred gently inside him and spoke only one word that sent a chill through his entire soul. "Find her." The past does not always return as an enemy. Sometimes it returns as a question that only the heart can answer. Dawn broke beneath a sky washed in soft shades of gold as Adeline Carter stood outside the bakery, watching travelers drift along the quiet road leading toward the distant mountains. The peaceful town of Briar Hollow had begun to feel like the life she had once dreamed of, a place where no one whispered about traitors or royal courts. Yet every peaceful morning carried another hidden weight. Somewhere beyond those hills, the future continued moving toward the same crossroads she had escaped. She could not stop remembering the royal hunting expedition. In her first life she had arrived at the palace stables by pure chance on the morning of the hunt. While delivering fresh herbs for the royal kitchens, she had overheard stable hands discussing fresh wolf tracks along the northern ridge. Concerned for the king's safety, she had quietly suggested an alternate trail to one of the captains. No one had known that her simple observation had unknowingly diverted the hunting party away from a carefully prepared ambush. No one had thanked her because no one had ever realized what she had prevented. This time she was hundreds of miles away. If she remained silent, history could reclaim everything it had nearly lost. By mid-morning Adeline made her decision. She borrowed a swift brown mare from the baker's family and rode toward the old watchtower overlooking the northern valley. She did not intend to approach the king. She only needed to leave another warning where the royal scouts would find it before the hunting party reached the ridge. As sunlight filtered through towering pines, she reached the abandoned tower and climbed its weathered stone steps. Hidden inside the cracked wall was an emergency signal horn once used by forest rangers. She remembered it from her childhood. Instead of sounding the horn, she tucked a sealed letter beneath it, addressed only to Captain Rowan. Northern Ridge. Change the route immediately. Trust the Western Trail. Do not ask how I know. Save your king. She slipped away before anyone could see her. Less than an hour later, Captain Rowan discovered the message while inspecting the tower before the royal procession arrived. He carried the letter directly to King Darius Ashford without speaking a word. Darius read the unfamiliar handwriting twice. The same strange certainty settled over him again. Whoever this hidden protector was, they knew dangers before they appeared. Against the objections of several nobles, he calmly folded the letter and ordered the entire expedition to follow the Western Trail instead. Lady Vivian Hawthorne forced herself to smile as the route changed, though unease tightened inside her. Twice now, invisible hands had altered events she believed were certain. Someone was interfering with plans carefully arranged long before the hunting season began. That evening the hunting party returned safely to the palace after receiving reports that a massive landslide had blocked the original northern pass only hours after they would have crossed it. The court praised the king's wisdom for choosing another route. Darius accepted none of the praise. Standing alone beneath the fading sunset, he stared toward the western forests where the unseen author of the warning had vanished once again. His wolf no longer paced in confusion. Instead it waited with quiet certainty, as though following a scent carried by the evening wind. Far away, Adeline guided the borrowed mare back toward Briar Hollow beneath the first stars of the night. Relief softened her weary heart. Another tragedy had been avoided without revealing her identity. Perhaps this was enough. Perhaps she truly could change fate from the shadows. But as she approached the town gate, she noticed an unfamiliar black carriage bearing the royal crest parked outside the bakery. Two palace messengers stood beside it asking the townspeople only one question. Had anyone seen a young woman with golden brown hair traveling alone through the western roads? The heart recognizes what the mind refuses to remember, and sometimes destiny begins with nothing more than a familiar scent carried by the wind. Adeline Carter pulled the hood of her traveling cloak lower as she guided the borrowed mare toward the rear alley behind the bakery. The royal carriage remained at the front of the building while two messengers patiently questioned merchants, children, and travelers. Neither of them carried weapons drawn or voices filled with accusation. That alone confused her. In her first life the palace had never searched for her until it was too late. Now they were searching before she had ever stepped through the palace gates. The timeline had changed again. She quietly led the mare into an old stable hidden behind rows of apple trees and waited until twilight settled across Briar Hollow. Through a narrow crack in the wooden wall she watched one of the messengers speak kindly with the baker's wife. The older woman simply shook her head. "Many young women pass through this town," she said with a gentle smile. "I wish I could help you, but I have not seen the person you describe." Adeline lowered her eyes, grateful beyond words for the quiet protection offered without question. Once darkness covered the streets, the royal carriage finally departed. Relief washed over her, but it did not last. Why had the king begun searching for a woman he had never truly met? Miles away inside the royal palace, Darius Ashford stood within the ancient royal library surrounded by maps, reports, and sealed records stretching back generations. Captain Rowan had just finished recounting everything he had learned. Both anonymous warnings had been written in the same elegant hand. Both had arrived shortly before disaster. Both had saved lives. "Do you believe this is the work of one of our spies?" Rowan asked carefully. Darius slowly shook his head. "A spy protects secrets. Whoever this person is, they protect people." He looked again at the copied handwriting. Every curve of every letter stirred a strange familiarity that he could not explain. His wolf remained unusually alert, almost expectant. Then another memory struck without warning. For the briefest instant he saw slender fingers wrapping a faded ribbon around a bundle of wild herbs while a soft voice laughed somewhere beyond his reach. The vision disappeared before he could grasp it, leaving only an aching emptiness inside his chest. Rowan noticed the king's distant expression. "Your Majesty?" Darius exhaled slowly. "Find the woman who wrote these letters," he said quietly. "Not because she is under suspicion. Because I believe she is trying to save this kingdom." Hidden behind a carved doorway, Lady Vivian Hawthorne listened without revealing herself. The king's words unsettled her more deeply than any military report. He was no longer searching for an enemy. He was searching for an ally. That had never happened before. As she returned to her private chambers, her thoughts raced through possibilities until one impossible name surfaced from forgotten memories. Adeline Carter. The insignificant Omega who should have accepted her place quietly. Vivian dismissed the thought almost immediately. Adeline had never reached the palace this time. She could not possibly know enough to interfere. Yet uncertainty lingered like a shadow she could not escape. Back in Briar Hollow, Adeline sat alone beneath the stars outside the bakery after everyone had gone to sleep. The cool night air carried the scent of pine and fresh bread while silence settled gently around her. She wanted to believe she had finally escaped the life that had destroyed her once before. Then the familiar pressure beneath her ribs returned, stronger than ever. She pressed a trembling hand against her heart as an unexpected image flashed across her mind. Darius stood alone inside a vast library, holding one of her anonymous letters while searching the room with eyes filled not with judgment, but with quiet sorrow. The vision lasted only a heartbeat before fading into darkness. Adeline drew a slow breath, shaken by what she had seen. If she could somehow glimpse fragments of his present, then the bond between them was awakening in ways neither of them understood. Before she could gather her thoughts, hurried footsteps echoed across the empty street. The baker's young son ran toward her, breathless and frightened. "Miss Adeline," he whispered. "A stranger arrived after the royal carriage left. He said he is not looking for the woman the king seeks. He is looking for the woman who keeps changing fate. Some truths do not reveal themselves through words. They choose the moment when fear and hope become impossible to separate." Adeline Carter rose slowly from the wooden bench outside the bakery, her pulse quickening as the baker's young son pointed toward the quiet edge of town. A lone traveler stood beneath an old maple tree where moonlight filtered through the branches. He wore a weathered gray cloak instead of noble colors, and his silver hair caught the pale light as though the years themselves had settled upon his shoulders. The moment his calm blue eyes met hers, Adeline felt something she had not experienced since awakening in her second life. Recognition. Not because she knew the man, but because some forgotten part of her soul did. She stepped closer while remaining cautious. "Who are you?" she asked softly. The old traveler smiled with quiet kindness. "Someone who has been waiting for the one who remembers." The words stole the breath from her lungs. No one should have known. No one could have known. Before she found the courage to answer, the stranger raised one open hand to reassure her. "You need not fear me, Lady Adeline. I have no loyalty to the throne or to those who seek power within it. I serve only the moon." Her heartbeat echoed inside her ears. Memories from her first life returned like distant thunder. She remembered hearing ancient stories as a child about mysterious moon oracles whose duty was to preserve the balance between fate and choice. She had dismissed them as legends. Yet the man standing before her seemed as real as the cool evening breeze. He studied her carefully before speaking again. "You believe your second chance belongs only to you. It does not. Every choice you change sends ripples through countless lives. The future is already struggling to rewrite itself around you." Adeline lowered her gaze. "I only wanted to survive." His expression softened. "And because you chose to survive, others have survived as well." He reached into his satchel and removed a small polished stone shaped like a crescent moon. The moment she accepted it, warmth spread gently across her fingertips. Strange symbols shimmered briefly across its surface before fading into silence. Your blood remembers something even your mind has forgotten, the traveler whispered. One day you will see what others cannot. When that day comes, trust your heart before your eyes. Before Adeline could ask another question, distant hoofbeats echoed along the road. The old man glanced toward the sound with quiet understanding. We will not meet again until the kingdom stands before its greatest lie, he said. Then, almost impossibly, he stepped behind the ancient maple tree. By the time Adeline reached it only seconds later, the space beyond was empty. No footprints marked the soft earth. Only the cool night air remained. At the royal palace, Darius Ashford awoke suddenly before dawn, his breathing uneven as another dream slipped through his grasp. This time the woman's face had almost become clear. He remembered golden brown hair illuminated by morning sunlight and gentle green eyes filled with both sadness and determination. More unsettling than the dream itself was the overwhelming certainty that he had once broken her trust. He pressed a hand against his chest as guilt settled over him without explanation. Across the corridor, Lady Vivian Hawthorne watched the restless king through a slightly open doorway before quietly retreating into the shadows. She had spent days investigating every rumor carried from the western villages until one detail finally reached her ears. A baker's family had recently welcomed a young traveler with golden brown hair who preferred to remain unnoticed. Vivian's smile returned, calm and confident once again. Perhaps fate had changed. Perhaps history had taken another path. But hidden hearts could still be found. As sunrise painted the eastern sky in soft gold, a royal summons bearing the king's personal seal left the palace, traveling not toward noble estates or military outposts, but toward the peaceful roads leading to Briar Hollow. The greatest lies are not the ones spoken aloud. They are the ones an entire kingdom chooses to believe until the truth refuses to remain hidden. The royal summons reached Briar Hollow just after sunrise, carried by two respectful messengers who asked only that every resident gather in the village square. Adeline Carter stood quietly among the crowd with her hood drawn low, her heart beating steadily. Despite the unease rising inside her, Captain Rowan unfolded the parchment bearing King Darius Ashford's personal seal and spoke in a calm voice. By order of His Majesty, the unknown guardian who has twice protected the kingdom is invited to come forward under the protection of the crown. No accusation shall be brought against any person who answers the summons in good faith. The king seeks only the truth. A murmur spread through the villagers. The baker glanced toward Adeline for the briefest moment before lowering his eyes, honoring the silence she had trusted him to keep. Adeline remained perfectly still. In her first life she would have believed those words without hesitation. She had once believed justice naturally followed honesty. She knew better now. After the messengers departed, she slipped away to the quiet hill overlooking the town. The crescent-shaped stone given to her by the mysterious traveler rested warmly in her palm. As sunlight touched its polished surface, delicate silver lines appeared across the stone before slowly extending over her fingers like moonlight reflected on water. Startled, she watched as the glowing pattern faded into her skin without leaving a mark. At that same instant another vision overtook her. She stood inside the royal throne room surrounded by nobles. Above every person shimmered faint threads of pale silver, each one stretching toward another soul. Some glowed brightly with honesty. Others were dim, tangled, and fractured. Then her eyes found Vivian Hawthorne. The luna's thread was not silver at all. It was wrapped in shadows that shifted like smoke, hiding countless broken strands beneath a perfect surface. Before Adeline could look away, another thread appeared. It stretched from King Darius directly toward her own heart, brighter than every other bond in the room. The vision vanished as quickly as it had begun. She staggered backward, breathing hard. The old traveler had spoken the truth. She could now see something no ordinary person could. Far away inside the palace, Darius stood before the ancient moon mirror, a relic rarely consulted except during moments of great uncertainty. The polished silver surface. reflected only his own image until, without warning, another face flickered across it for a heartbeat. A young woman with golden brown hair lowered her eyes sadly before disappearing like mist. Darius reached toward the mirror instinctively, but the vision had already faded. His wolf surged with unmistakable certainty. She is real. Find her. Before he could speak, Captain Rowan entered carrying troubling news. Your Majesty, Lady Vivian has requested an emergency session of the Royal Council. She claims someone is manipulating recent events to undermine confidence in the crown. Darius frowned. On what evidence? Rowan hesitated. Anonymous letters, and reports of a mysterious woman traveling alone through the western villages. The king's expression hardened, though not with suspicion. Then we will hear every witness before reaching judgment. Hidden behind the council chamber doors, Vivian allowed herself a quiet smile. She no longer needed proof. She only needed to place the unknown woman before the entire court. Once fear began speaking louder than reason, history would eagerly repeat itself. Hundreds of miles away, Adeline looked once more toward the distant capital, her fingers resting over the place where the glowing pattern had disappeared. She had spent her second life running from the palace. Now she understood that fate was no longer chasing only her. It was calling her back, not to repeat the past, but to reveal the truth that the kingdom had never been able to see. The kingdom that once judged with closed eyes would soon discover that truth shines brightest when no one can command it to remain hidden. 3 days later, Adeline Carter crossed the great stone bridge leading to the royal capital, not because fate had defeated her, but because she had finally chosen to face it on her own terms. Every familiar street awakened memories she wished had remained buried. She remembered walking these roads with hope in her first life, believing kindness would always be recognized. Now she carried no expectations, only quiet resolve. The crescent stone rested safely beneath her cloak, warm against her heart with every step toward the palace. News of the emergency council had spread throughout the city, drawing nobles, merchants, guards, and ordinary citizens into the great audience hall. Rumors traveled faster than truth. Some whispered that an unknown conspirator had manipulated recent events. Others believed a mysterious guardian had saved the kingdom more than once. No one realized both stories pointed toward the same woman. King Darius Ashford stood before the assembled court wearing his black royal armor and crimson cloak, his expression calm despite the storm within him. Every restless dream, every forgotten memory, every unexplained feeling had led him to this day. Beside the throne stood Lady Vivian Hawthorne, graceful as ever, her smile untouched by uncertainty. She stepped forward with perfect composure. Your Majesty, she said, someone has repeatedly interfered with royal affairs while refusing to reveal their identity. Such secrecy threatens the stability of the crown. Whoever this person is must answer before the kingdom. Before Darius could respond, the great doors opened. The sound echoed through the silent hall as every face turned toward the entrance. Adeline walked forward slowly, her simple green-gray dress untouched by jewels or noble symbols. Murmurs swept through the chamber as recognition spread among a handful of older servants who remembered the quiet Omega from years before. Darius looked into her eyes, and the world around him seemed to disappear. The dreams were no longer dreams. The woman he had searched for stood before him, real and unmistakable. At that same instant the crescent stone beneath Adeline's cloak began to glow softly. Silver light spread across the polished floor, and before the astonished court delicate threads appeared around every person in the chamber. Some shimmered with quiet honesty. Others flickered uncertainly. Around Vivian, dark strands twisted tightly around pale ones, impossible to ignore. Gasps filled the hall. Adeline understood without anyone explaining. The Moon Oracle's gift had awakened completely. She could finally see the hidden bonds of truth. Vivian instinctively stepped backward, her confidence breaking for the first time. Darius stared not at the glowing threads but at Adeline herself as another memory crashed into him with overwhelming clarity. He saw her standing alone beneath gray skies, offering one final look before he turned away. He heard his own voice ordering a sentence he had never lived in this lifetime yet somehow remembered with unbearable certainty. Sorrow flooded his heart. Without hesitation he descended from the throne and stopped only a few feet before her. Every noble in the room watched as the Alpha King slowly lowered himself onto one knee. Silence filled the palace. Whether these memories belong to another life or only to my soul, he said quietly, I know this much. I failed you once before I ever understood your worth. I will never again allow fear or pride to speak louder than truth. Tears filled many eyes throughout the chamber, but Adeline remained still. She had not returned to reclaim love or revenge. She had returned so that innocence would never again stand alone against power. She gently raised her gaze toward the gathered council. Justice cannot depend upon the rank of the person speaking, she said. If the weakest voice is never heard, then no kingdom is truly safe. Darius rose and turned toward the assembly. Before every witness he announced a new royal decree establishing independent investigations for every accusation against commoners and nobles alike, ensuring that no person could ever again be condemned without open evidence and fair judgment. Then he looked back at Adeline with quiet hope rather than expectation. This time he did not ask her to stay. He did not ask her to forgive him. He simply offered her the freedom to choose her own future. And for the first time across 2 lifetimes, Adeline smiled because the future before her finally belonged to her alone.